Okay, we are going to jump right into the Understanding ADHD class. Welcome to Regenesis RX. I do want to let you guys know that next month I will only be teaching one class. Just with the new job starting, I'm now doing clinical pharmacy. I'm managing some of the sickest patients with all kinds of really complicated disease states. Plus, it's clinical pharmacy, so it's a little more demanding than my retail job. By a little, I mean a lot more demanding. So just super, super short on time. And I don't want to shortchange you guys. I don't want to just throw together a class last minute without proper preparation and research. Even though these are all topics that I work with, I'd really like to take my time and put in the research as well. And I always find really interesting facts, different statistics and whatnot that I did not know prior to each one of these classes. So I don't want to shortchange you guys or myself by not putting the proper effort into these classes. So next month, at least, there's only going to be one class. It is going to be on hypothyroid disease. We're going to cover all the different types of hypothyroid disease, ways that you can manage that, etc. But hopefully the month after, I'll be more in the routine of my new job, and we'll be able to get back to 2 classes per month. That is my hope. And sorry, guys, please ignore the craziness back here. We're like redoing the whole house. So you might see even more craziest next time, but we'll see. And of course, the ebook, I actually already just put it up in the app right now. It's available. You'll definitely want to check that out because it has more information that we're not going to be covering in the class. And then the replay will be available hopefully tonight. I do have to head into work right after this, so hopefully I'll have time. If not, it'll be in there tomorrow morning. We can skip the introduction. You guys all know me. Okay, what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about what exactly is ADHD, because there can be a lot of confusion about what exactly it entails. The signs and the symptoms of ADHD. We're going to talk about boys versus girls. I think this is a really important topic to touch on when you discuss ADHD because it can often manifest very differently in boys versus girls, and girls a lot of times will go undiagnosed. We'll dive into that in great depth. We're going to talk about indecision and temper issues that can be associated with ADHD, and of course, medications and also natural ways to cope with and manage ADHD, and some tips for parents because I wanted this class to be for adults who are dealing with ADHD and also parents who are dealing with kids who have ADHD. So I want it to kind of hit both sides of that. Okay, here's your standard disclaimer. Please don't take anything I say here as specific medical advice meant for you. You need to take anything I say here and take it back to your doctor so they can apply it to your medical situation. I have no idea what your history is, your medications. So just make sure that you are checking in with a doctor. This is just for informational purposes only, okay? All right, so what exactly is ADHD? Well, it was first identified in 1902 by a British pediatrician. He actually called it a defect of moral character, and he said that it was something only found in children. Neither one of these is true. Research eventually showed that ADHD runs in families and actually has a genetic and physical basis. But unfortunately, the moral defect theory is still alive and well in some people's minds. Those of you who have ADHD or who have family members or loved ones with ADHD, you know full well how judgmental people can be about this condition. Some people think that it's just made up or that people who have it are just lazy or crazy. This is categorically, scientifically untrue, okay? Just because something did not receive a formal name until 1902, that does not mean that this condition is made up. I hear that all the time. People with ADHD in the past, because people have always had ADHD, I'm sure, they simply found coping mechanisms to deal with it and to manage their symptoms, or they didn't. Some people fell through the cracks. They just were not able to cope and they ended up homeless, jobless, not able to fit into society, whatever. This is a common misconception that I hear constantly. Oh, in my day, things like ADHD and celiac and this and that, they didn't exist. So I don't believe that they're real. No, people have always had these conditions. They just usually received zero support and either found their way through it on their own or they didn't. We just have a name for it now, and we have a diagnosis, we have strategies, we have ways that we know that we can help people. And diagnosis truly matters, in my opinion, because a lot of times people are like, well, who really cares if you're diagnosed with ADHD? What does that mean? Diagnosis matters because it can be empowering for people to finally figure out that they have ADHD, especially if they're diagnosed later in life. To put a name to symptoms that have made people feel bad about themselves and to realize that there is a physical reason for what is going on in their brains and in their lives and in their bodies, that it's not just a moral failing or being lazy. Knowing, okay, this is a thing that I have to cope with and find strategies to work around. And these are my potential weaknesses and these are my potential strengths. That's extremely helpful. Okay, for someone to not think I'm just a bad person or I'm just not capable of certain things. To know, no, I have these physical and chemical differences in my brain, but I can work around it. Something that is interesting to note is that we used to think that only kids had ADHD and that it's something that you basically grow out of. This is not true. We now know that ADHD is a lifelong condition. It's just that many adults have finally found ways to cope with or to mask or to manage their ADHD, so it's not as easily recognizable. Most adults are not going to be like jumping up and running around in the middle of a board meeting. They have found ways to manage their feelings and to be able to sit down and just kind of, quietly fidget under the table or something, as opposed to little kids who might literally just stand up and run around the classroom, right? Okay. ADHD also is not a single condition, but it's actually a cluster of symptoms that can change over time and can present really differently from one person to another. It often looks very different in boys versus girls. Like I said earlier, we'll talk about that more. And also adults versus children. Adults usually figure out a way around this. This is a chronic condition, including attention difficulty, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness. Sometimes people forget the impulsiveness picture, but we will touch on this. And there are 3 types of ADHD. There is inattentive ADHD, hyperactive ADHD, which is the most stereotypical one that we normally think of. And there's also combined. So some people get the best of everything, right? They just get to experience all of the symptoms. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. Okay, so signs and symptoms of ADHD. People who have ADHD have distinct brain differences, including an understimulated prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that conducts executive functioning, which includes your ability to stay organized and attentive, to have memory recall, and to complete tasks from beginning to end. To be clear, the brain differences of someone who has ADHD do not affect IQ. They are completely unrelated. So you can have someone with ADHD who is incredibly bright, genius, Mensa, or also someone with ADHD who has an incredibly low, below average IQ. There is absolutely no correlation there. So I just want to make that very abundantly clear. Difficulty at school, that is the most classic sign of ADHD. People who have ADHD are often distracted by external factors going on in the classroom. So they have trouble with attention. If some shiny object is over here, they're going to immediately look over there. They have issues focusing. And they also have thoughts bouncing around inside their head. So they can be distracted by nothing at all. They can be distracted just by daydreaming. For very bright kids with ADHD, they often go undiagnosed since they can just halfway pay attention or not really pay much attention at all and still perform well on tests. So that's something to keep in mind, that just because someone is super bright, that does not mean that they're not struggling in some way and that they need some support. Challenges with relationships is another sign. People who have ADHD are known for interrupting frequently, blurting out whatever is on their mind, and not paying close attention to social cues. All of these things can affect relationships, whether that's intimate partner relationships, friendships, even working relationships with colleagues, all of that. An inability to perform day-to-day tasks is another sign or symptom of ADHD. People with ADHD are often bouncing around from one thing to the next constantly. They just have trouble doing something from start to finish. So for example, you could ask a kid to go upstairs, get their shoes, bring them downstairs and put them on. Seems very, very simple for those of us without ADHD, right? However, for a kid with ADHD, this is a complicated sequence of events that they can easily get lost in or distracted from. So they may go upstairs and never come back down because they got distracted with something. Or they may come back down, but with something other than their shoes. They totally forgot the shoes part of the picture. Or they may come back down with their shoes and not put them on, put them in a random place and forget about that last part. All of these things are possibilities. With adults, it can look a little bit different. It could manifest as procrastinating paying bills. Even though there's plenty of money in the bank, there's really no reason to procrastinate. They just procrastinate. They don't know why. If you ask them why, they can't tell you. It's just kind of the way that their brain chemistry works. It can include impulsive spending. As I said, impulsivity is a classic ADHD sign. A lot of people don't recognize that. But spending money that you don't have, very, very correlated with ADHD. Trouble managing long-term projects, another ADHD sign. As I said, they get distracted and in the weeds, like a long sequence of events are some of the most challenging things for people who have ADHD. Inattentive. So this is one of the types of, the 3 different types of ADHD. The inattentive category has specific symptoms. So if you have inattentive ADHD, you are going to manifest more careless mistakes. So you know how to do your schoolwork or an assignment, whatever, but you just carelessly do the wrong thing for no reason because you're just not paying close enough attention. Not seeming to listen. This can be in children and adults. You might notice that your partner seems distracted all the time when you're talking to them. They may be struggling with ADHD. Kids, you're telling them instructions in the classroom, just not paying any attention, and you just can't seem to get them to zone into you. Trouble finishing tasks. That is an inattentive sign. Being forgetful. That's another one. Losing things very easily. We're not talking about your typical losing something once in a while. Someone who seems to lose things constantly, maybe struggling with ADHD. And of course, getting easily distracted, daydreaming, all of those things. Those are manifestations of the inattentive type of ADHD. Hey, Kinsley, can you grab that? Sorry, guys, I have something being delivered right now. I knew it was going to get delivered right as the class started, but I didn't want to be late. Okay, so as far as the hyperactive form of ADHD, what are those signs and symptoms? Fidgeting, not being able to sit still, running or climbing or getting up at inappropriate times, especially this is like the classic ADHD picture that we all think of in our heads when we think of ADHD, the little boy who will not sit still in class. He's just always up, running around, full of energy, distracting everyone else. That is the hyperactive form of ADHD. Talking excessively, not allowing others to get in a word edgewise. Trouble waiting and taking turns. That's another classic manifestation that you'll see in school. Interrupting people continuously. That's another thing. And for combined, you'll see a mixture of all of these traits. As I said, some people are just lucky and they get a little bit of everything. Okay, so I really wanted to talk about boys versus girls for good reason. This kind of honestly breaks my heart a little bit when you look into the statistics. So currently 13% of boys and 6% of girls, so less than half of the amount of boys, are diagnosed with ADHD. But leading experts in the field of ADHD believe that there are equal number of boys and girls. They think that the discrepancy is actually due to an underdiagnosis of girls rather than ADHD being more prevalent in boys. So girls will often, now not always, I want to say, this is not a prescription like, oh, boys are always going to manifest this way, girls are always going to manifest this way. You need to be on the lookout for these specifically and nothing else. There can absolutely be hyperactive girls and inattentive boys. But in general, we more often see girls being diagnosed with the inattentive form and boys with the hyperactive form. And as I said earlier, when we think of ADHD in our minds, most of us picture the really energetic, bouncy little boy who is interrupting the class. Okay. We don't picture a little girl who's just looking out the window at butterflies and just kind of daydreaming and not bothering anybody, but also not getting everything that she can out of school. Right. So girls often exhibit the inattentive symptoms and they just don't disrupt class. Daydreaming only affects that student who is daydreaming. But a little boy who can't sit still at his desk and is up running around and interrupting the teacher and just like screaming for attention, he's gonna get noticed. Girls also are often misdiagnosed with anxiety or depression. This is also true for women. It seems that pretty much anytime that a woman exhibits some type of non-specific whatever, it often gets misdiagnosed as anxiety or depression. This happens frequently with menopause. Women will come in with, not necessarily hot flashes, but with a myriad of other symptoms. And instead of the doctor putting two and two together and saying, oh, it's probably menopause, do you want to talk about hormone replacement therapy? Instead, they are diagnosed with anxiety or depression. Same thing with ADHD. Non-specific symptoms that can't be easily checked for a blood test, they're often handed an anxiety or depression diagnosis. So that's one case, right? But we also need to talk about our expectations and our perceptions as a society for girls versus boys, because that's another factor that is definitely at play here. In two different studies that I saw while researching for this class specifically, teachers were given case studies of kid behavior in the classroom, and they were asked what should be done. If you were this student's teacher, what would you do? Now, they kept all of the case studies identical. They just changed the name to a little boy name or to a little girl name. And what do you know? Teachers were more than twice as likely to suggest that the little boy receive support and intervention. The cases were identical. It was just the name that was changed. So hopefully we all are doing our best to change our perceptions and expectations of boys versus girls and kind of expect the same thing from both genders. But currently we're living in a world where basically often little girls are taught to be good friends and be polite. So they get better at masking and coping with those social aspects of ADHD. And little boys are taught to be strong and independent. So they're not as focused on being polite and being a good friend, right? So their manifestation is more that hyperactive, athletic, strong little boy versus the little girl who just learns early to cope with the social symptoms. So hopefully society will slowly change. But for now, just be on the lookout for those inattentive, daydreamy little girls and know that they could very, very easily have ADHD and they need support and they need strategies to help them to cope with this illness, just like the hyperactive little boy who's up and running around. So some classic girl ADHD symptoms include low self-esteem. That really breaks my heart. But a lot of these little girls, if they don't get diagnosed and don't understand that they have chemical brain differences, that this is a physical thing, that it's not just made up, they feel broken. They feel like there's something wrong with them. They feel like class and paying attention and social relationships are just so much easier for everyone else because they're wrong. They have a deficit, they have a failure, right? So that's really sad, but it happens a lot. Needing extra help with schoolwork. That's another sign. If you've got to sit there and sit right next to your kid as they're doing homework, just think about it. It could be a sign of ADHD. It might be time to get them evaluated by an expert to see if they concur. Trouble listening, as I said earlier. Academic underachievement. So just not doing as well as we would normally expect. Anxiety, it can often go hand in hand with ADHD. If someone has undiagnosed ADHD and they're trying to deal with that, it can be really stressful. Careless mistakes. So they know better. If you ask them, they can tell you they know better, but they just keep carelessly making the same mistakes. Zoning out, daydreaming, difficulty organizing. If they are just a hot mess and you constantly have to go behind them and organize all of their things, that could be a sign. Poor time management. They get distracted. They go to clean their room and instead they start playing with the first toy that they see, right? That can be a sign. And frequently losing things. As I said, we all lose things from time to time, but if it is just a constant problem with one of your kids or with yourself, it could be a sign of ADHD. And it's important to get girls the proper diagnosis for self-esteem and for help coping and managing their ADHD. Once they know what's going on and understand, it's so much easier for them to accept who they are and say, okay, this is a thing that I have to deal with, but I can deal with it, rather than just thinking I'm broken and I don't know what's wrong with me and why everything is so much easier for everyone else. All right, so I also wanted to talk about the indecision factor. This is something that people complain to me about all the time who deal with ADHD. It's basically just the feeling that you have so much to do that you just can't do anything. And we all experience this from time to time, right? I know all of us live busy lives. We've all had times where there are just so many things on our plate that we're like, ah. But for people with ADHD, this feeling can be overwhelming and constant. It's just like, oh my gosh, I have so much on my plate all the time. I will never get these things done. Decision paralysis is another name for this. That's what I like to call it. And it's connected to dopamine imbalances. So those with ADHD have chronically low dopamine levels. It's measurable, it's physical, it is chemical. As I said, it's not just them being lazy or, freaking out and being overwhelmed for no reason. They've got chronically low dopamine, which can make it difficult to get enough motivation to act on a task. So dopamine is like a go signal in the brain. For those without ADHD, checking off a task can be extremely rewarding. I know this is me. I don't have any ADHD in me. And oh my goodness, there's nothing I love more than a checklist. Making a checklist and checking off a checklist, that is like firing up the dopamine in my brain, right? So an example of this would be, you don't really like doing the dishes, you don't like mowing the yard, you don't like doing laundry, obviously, but having these items off of your to-do list and walking into a clean, uncluttered home is very rewarding. And that in and of itself is enough motivation to get you moving through these boring tasks. In the brain of someone with ADHD, there's not enough dopamine to translate that future reward into present motivation. This means activities that are not instantly rewarding, something like playing video games or watching videos on social media or calling your friend, whatever. These are much more difficult to force yourself to do. That little dopamine checkoff list, it doesn't work for you. So there are certain ways that you can work around this. I just wanted to touch on these because, like I said, a lot of people with ADHD, and there's someone really close to me who has ADHD, this is one of their biggest struggles in life. So task stacking is one really cool strategy that I like. This is basically combining multiple tasks at one time. And it can kind of be like a cheat code for getting things done. It can kind of help you to gamify your life. So for example, doing the dishes is boring. Waiting for water to boil to start cooking something, also super boring. But trying to get all of the dishes done before the water starts to boil, okay, that can be more of a challenge. That can be more fun. So you can start combining tasks like these to see how much you can get done. And sometimes that can be enough. I know that that is really, really helpful for my close loved one who has to deal with ADHD. Hyperfocus is another thing that you can use to your advantage. Now, not everyone with ADHD has this, but many people do. Some people with ADHD experience hyperfocus where you obsess over one topic. You just like absolutely research something to death. You know it forwards and backwards, can do like a 3-week long class on it with zero preparation because you just know it inside and out. That is hyperfocus. If you can use this to your advantage and take an entire day or a week or a month, if it's a really big project, and just lean into it, ignore everything else, go into that hyper focus zone, let your ADHD racing mind take over and just sink your teeth into it. Don't worry about anything else. Just really get into that project. That can be really helpful. I know that this is something one of my mentors, who was a pharmacist, and back when I was just a technician and an intern, she had ADHD, and she would talk about this all the time. She called hyperfocus her superpower. She would get so obsessed into a topic in pharmacy school, she would know it better than the professor. So using hyperfocus to your advantage can be really helpful. And then also another thing, which is actually the opposite of hyperfocus, but which a lot of people with ADHD can find helpful, is hopping from task to task as needed. Just switch around however you like when doing mundane tasks like cleaning. So a lot of people with ADHD, they'll try to force themselves to just do everything from start to finish. And their brain doesn't really work that way. So if they're trying to clean up, they will go and they'll start to, sweep the floor, but then they'll notice that the shoes aren't put away. So then they'll stop sweeping and they'll put away the shoes. And then thinking about the shoes makes them think, oh my gosh, I haven't mowed the yard yet. So then they'll go outside and start to mow the yard, but then they're like, oh, I didn't water the flowers. Let me water the flowers. So they're just jumping around. And sometimes they try to force themselves into not doing that. They're like, no, I need to sweep the floor first, and then I can move on to the next thing. But then they've already forgotten about the next thing, right? Sometimes it's helpful to just jump around however you want to, because you're still getting a lot of things done. You're just not necessarily getting them done in a row, right? So instead of beating yourself up and trying to work against yourself and trying to force yourself into a mold that doesn't work for you, just let yourself jump around however you like. And at the end of the day, just appreciate the myriad of tasks that you were able to get done. Just embrace yourself as you are, right? Okay, temper. This is something that I thought was important to touch on as well when it comes to ADHD, because 70% of adults with ADHD report being more impatient and quick to anger than those without ADHD. Emotional dysregulation is to blame, or difficulty managing emotions. This all relates to that prefrontal cortex that we talked about earlier, all of that executive functioning that is just really challenging in the ADHD brain. It can often manifest in this way. So people with ADHD are more likely to have angry outbursts, feel impatient, defy authority, be more excitable, experience anxiety, and basically just feel emotions more intensely than those without ADHD. But once again, there are things that you can do. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, this can be extremely useful for teaching coping strategies to manage emotions and have healthy relationships with coworkers, friends, and loved ones. Super helpful for people without ADHD as well. But I often find that it's very, very helpful for people with ADHD, just to give them a strategy, something that they can turn to, give them a little bit of experience, things that they may not have thought of, that can just help them to deal with that emotional dysregulation. Mindfulness has been proven in studies to help children as young as 7, as well as adults, to control emotions. Sleep, incredibly important. If you're tired, you're cranky, period. So make sure that you get that sleep. And this can also be challenging with certain ADHD medications. We will talk about that in a minute, but make sure that you are not taking your ADHD medications too late in the day. They will cause insomnia. You might have a little trial and error to figure out something that works for you, but you might have to play around with that dosing and make sure that your medication is not keeping you up, or consequently, maybe taking something to counteract the effects. A lot of times we'll see that with kids. Exercise. Research shows that this can be incredibly helpful, especially for children with hyperactivity manifestations of ADHD. So letting those hyperactive little kids that cannot sit still in class, let them run absolutely wild each day. It will help them to manage their emotions and cope with their ADHD. Now, when I think about this, I think of Caesar, I can't remember his last name, the dog whisperer. Absolutely loved that show. I used to watch it all the time. And if you notice, the first thing that Caesar does with a lot of these dogs who are just absolutely out of control, wild, they're like, won't settle down, jumping all over the furniture, jumping all over people, attacking people, everything. The first thing he does is take these dogs for a really long walk. And then he explains to people, hey, you've got a high energy dog, you've got a German Shepherd, you've got a Golden Retriever, you've got, a Greyhound, whatever. These are high energy dogs that were born and bred to have jobs. And if you're cooping them up in an apartment all day long, they're going to be miserable and they're not going to be able to control themselves. That is the same thing with these kids or adults who have hyperactive manifestations of ADHD. Okay, they were like born and bred. It's in their brain chemistry. It is genetic. There is a high family history component to this, right? They were born and bred to be high energy. And if we are trying to take that little person and sit them in a classroom for 6 hours a day without moving, it is absolutely not going to work. Let them get out that energy. Let them run around, be wild and crazy. Let their body run free. And then their mind can kind of calm down and they can start to match that energy. Meditation can also be super helpful. I love apps for this. They have all kinds of great apps. Calm, Meditate. You'll see many others out there. You don't have to be a meditation expert to use these apps. You press play, it tells you exactly what to do. Breathing exercises are another thing proven in research to help those with ADHD to manage emotions. Okay, so the question is, how do we cope with ADHD? Well, there are a few different ways. Non-stimulant medications are one option, and these will work by increasing the levels of norepinephrine in the brain, which will help with focus and concentration. These come by the brand names Strattera, Intuniv, Clonidine. Many people and children, adults and children with ADHD are put on these medications. A lot of times they will be used alongside stimulant medications, but I'll often see them in people who choose not to use stimulant medications as well for whatever reason. Not everyone tolerates stimulant medications, so this is a great alternative. Side effects of these medications include insomnia, as I said, fatigue, decreased appetite, nausea, and increased blood pressure, but the side effects are pretty rare. Most people get along with these really well. Most of the side effects are super mild. You got to think a lot of these medications were designed to be used in children, so we want the side effect profile to be pretty mild. And generally, these are really well tolerated. I don't have many people who complain of bad side effects with these. And if they don't work out for you, then they don't work out for you. Just move on to the next therapy. Let your doctor know, try out some different things. Don't be afraid to speak up. Let yourself be heard. Stimulant medications are by far and away the most commonly prescribed ADHD medication. This is your typical thing that you're thinking of, your Ritalin, your Adderall, your Vyvanse, your methylphenidate, all of that. These work by increasing the levels of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. We know people with ADHD have chronically low dopamine, and they desperately need that dopamine to feel more normal and to do a lot of the things that people without ADHD do really easily. Once again, this will improve focus and concentration. They can be short-acting or long-acting. Often people will take one of each. A lot of times I will see people taking a long-acting stimulant medication in the morning and then a short-acting one in the afternoon to kind of give them a little boost, get them tuned back in, or else they start to kind of flake out a little bit in the afternoon. Now, as I said, please be careful with that afternoon dose. Make sure that it is not too close to bedtime, because these medications can drastically affect sleep if taken too late in the day. They generally have a fairly short half-life, so they're not going to last that long. It's just going to be, several hours. But if you're taking it at 5 p.m., it's not good. So be mindful of that dosing. Side effects include decreased appetite, irritability, insomnia, and headaches. Once again, most side effects are generally mild. Some people just don't get along with these meds, but many people do. Now, I thought that it was really important to talk about this as a pharmacist, the shortage of the ADHD meds going on right now, which has been going on, honestly, quite some time. It really started with COVID. So, as we all know, the supply chains were disrupted around the world when it came to COVID. That happened with ADHD medication as well. We didn't really feel the pinch as much right away with the ADHD meds as we did with so many other things. But over time, with the continued issues with the supply chain since COVID began, it's been a huge problem. Something else that is really interesting and is not talked about enough is the fact that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, reported a 10% rise in adult prescriptions for ADHD medications between 2020 and 2021. That is massive. Interestingly enough, the child prescriptions stayed about the same. We're still at the same percentage for the child prescriptions, but adult prescriptions just increased tenfold. It's wild. And we really don't know why. There are lots of different theories about this. Some people think that as people had to work from home, there are just more distractions, more things going off. It's harder to focus when you're sitting in your home than it is at the office with a boss looking over your shoulder. There's another theory that people would see their kids and the difference in their kids when they were on the medication, sitting there doing their schoolwork versus when they weren't. And they were like, wow, I could really use that focus in my life. Maybe I have ADHD as well. So they sought treatment and started getting medication for themselves. Lots of different theories. But if you consider the supply chain disruptions with a 10% increase in prescriptions, that's huge. That is a 1-2 hit that is really, really affecting pharmacies right now. So we're struggling. I know my location, we've been struggling for a while now. And no, we aren't making it up. That's another thing that a lot of people would say when I would say, I'm sorry, we're out of stock. I don't know when we'll be back in stock. People would say, oh, that's not true. You just don't want to sell it to me. No, guys, it's really a shortage. There is a genuine shortage of ADHD medication, really with no end in sight. So hopefully people will start creating more of these medications and we'll have enough supply to keep up with the demand, because I completely understand. I don't have ADHD myself, but I do have very close loved ones and friends who struggle with ADHD, and I see firsthand how it affects their life when they are not able to access the medication that they need. All right, another thing that can potentially help with some aspects of ADHD are antidepressants. These can reduce the impulsive behaviors we talked about earlier, like the impulsive spending and whatnot, and also aggressive behaviors. So things like the temper issues that we spoke about. Depression can often go hand in hand with ADHD, especially if someone was diagnosed later in life. So if they just basically went around half of their life thinking that they're broken, there's something wrong with them, it's just harder for them to do everything than everyone else, and they finally get diagnosed in their 40s, 50s, 60s, a lot of times depression comes with that, just feeling inadequate, not understanding that there's just a chemical difference in your brain that you have to manage. Sorry, I forgot my water again. Oh, I hope I don't lose my voice. Antidepressants will increase serotonin in the brain, which will help improve mood. That is how antidepressants work. Side effects will include dry mouth, diarrhea, weight gain, sexual side effects, and suicidal thoughts in some people. So that is something to definitely be wary of. Okay, natural remedies. Oh my goodness, this is one of the most common questions that I get asked about ADHD. Can I stop taking my stimulant medications, or can my kids stop taking these, and can we do something natural? The short answer is no. Sorry to be disappointing. There are a few things that can help, but in general, if you need stimulant medication, then you need it. Now, I put omega-3 question mark because some studies show some benefit, others show absolutely nothing. It is a very tentative at best for me with omega-3. Now, I love omega-3 for so many things. There's clear evidence that it is cardioprotective, that it can help prevent Alzheimer's, that it can help arthritis. It's just a wonderful anti-inflammatory. So you guys know I love my omega-3. Do I think it helps with ADHD? I don't know about all that. I wouldn't run out and take omega-3 specifically for ADHD. But if you're already taking it for something else, wonderful side effect. Maybe it'll help your ADHD, right? Okay. Another thing that is really important is to check your iron. Check your kids' iron as well. A 2013 and a 2014 study both found an association between iron deficiency and ADHD in kids. So it could be as simple as your kid doesn't have enough iron, and they need that in order for their brain to function properly. So please get your iron checked in yourself, in your kid. Take the steps that you need to fix it. If they have severe iron deficiency, they may need iron infusions. If it's not that severe, then oftentimes you can get by with just changing your diet or adding in iron supplementation. Eating less sugar can absolutely help with ADHD. Added sugar is terrible for the brain and for your mood. Keep it under 25 grams of added sugar every day. Guys, natural sugars found in fruits and vegetables and whatnot, totally fine. Don't worry about those. I'm just talking about added sugars, processed sugars. Okay. You'll see it right there on the package. It'll say added sugars. Keep those under 25 grams. Things like GABA, pharma-GABA, can be really helpful for some people. We know that GABA may boost dopamine levels a bit, and that it certainly helps with stress and anxiety relief. I love a particular product that contains this for ADHD. I generally don't suggest that people just do the pharma-GABA alone for ADHD. It's a really quick acting thing. I like that product more for anxiety or stress reduction in the moment if you're having a really bad moment. But the NeuroLink product from Designs for Health, it's called NeuroLink. I really do like that product for ADHD. It's just like a 1 daily capsule. Now, the thing about NeuroLink, as beneficial as I find that it is, I've just had luck with it when I've suggested it to patients of mine in the past who are dealing with ADHD. They love it. They think it helps, but they're usually using it alongside stimulant medication, full disclosure. I don't think I've ever had a patient who went off of their stimulant medication and just switched to NeuroLink and did fine. I don't think that's ever happened. Usually people add it in to what they're already doing, and that little bit just really kind of helps them. It's like the last missing puzzle piece. So I don't really think that there is a supplement out there that can replace ADHD medication. I want to be clear on that. So I know people ask me about Brillia a lot. I'm honestly not a huge fan of Brillia, but I've had several people tell me that it worked wonders for their kid. So, far be it from me to say, I don't think it helped your kid. You know your kid much better than I do, right? So great. If you use that and find it helpful, that is wonderful. But I just don't think that supplements, this isn't their best use. There are some places where supplements really shine. ADHD just isn't necessarily one of those places, if that makes sense. All right, tips for parents. You guys already know these, but I just thought it was important to go over them as a quick reminder. Sometimes we just need a little reminder, right, to get us back in the right place. So recognize that hyperactivity is not the same thing as willful misbehavior in children. Many children with hyperactivity, they actually physically need to move their body frequently. Okay, they're not sitting here making the decision like, I don't care what you say, I'm going to do this anyway. They're not doing that. Okay, they're not like, the rebellious teenager who's like, screw you, mom and dad. No, they just actually physically have to move the same way that someone might physically have to drink if they're thirsty. Okay, so allow for this as much as possible. Give your kid regular time to run around and be crazy. Or if you're a teacher, do not withhold recess. Find some other way to punish the kids or to get them in line or whatever. Withholding recess, that is the one little sliver of time in a long day of trying to sit still and focus that kids get to just get that energy out. And it is literal torture keeping a hyperactive kid with ADHD inside sitting there while everyone else is running and playing. It's not beneficial for anyone. Allowing for accommodations like simple things like stress balls, fidget toys, allowing kids to stand at their desks sometimes if they need to, take breaks, whatever. These minor little accommodations are so incredibly beneficial. If you don't already have a 504 plan at the school with your child and they have ADHD, please, please do so. Please do so, because these little accommodations can be the difference between success and failure. If the kid is already battling so much internally, they're not going to be able to sit and focus and pay attention to what's going on at the front of the class, versus something as simple as a little fidget toy under the desk that doesn't disrupt class, that no one else even notices. Like I said, it could literally be the difference between success and failure for your child. And accept children as they are and help them to manage and cope. Do not try to force your kid to be something that they're not. All right, kids with ADHD are already much, much, much more likely to suffer from low self-esteem, depression, and anxiety. They often already feel like they're broken. Help them to understand that their brain is wired differently and that they are going to have to learn strategies to deal with this that other kids don't have to deal with. It's not fair, but it just is. And help them see they're not bad. They're not stupid. They're not doomed. They can find a way out of this. They're just going to have to work a little bit harder than everyone else. Just be upfront and realistic about that. And it can be life-changingly positive for a kid to start to frame things that way. One of my mentors was a pharmacist with ADHD, like I said, and she absolutely saw it as a superpower. And I loved that for her. She would talk about it all the time. She's like, I'm so lucky I have ADHD. Like I can just get more done. I have endless energy. I can hyper focus. You know, I loved that for her. For children to see themselves as valuable and unique and interesting and, you know, different, sure, but not bad different, just different. That's awesome. You know, sometimes these hyperactive kids will turn out to be super athletes because they're just running around all the time. They're just constantly on the move, craving physical outlets for things. So who knows, you know, you might have the next LeBron James in your family. Just let them be themselves and don't try to force them to be the next Albert Einstein if that's not who they are, you know? Do not try to force a kid with ADHD to sit in one spot and do boring assignments for hours. It's not going to work. They're not wired that way, and you will just end up making yourself and them upset. Okay. All right, please check out the ebook that is going to be in the app, you guys. Basically, I just added some further resources for you there. I added some books, a documentary that I thought was really cool, a couple podcasts that you can look into, just because ADHD is complicated. I can't obviously in an hour-long class here, sit here and go through all of the different things that someone has to deal with ADHD. This was like a very brief run through about some really important salient points that I wanted to bring up, and obviously medications, because I'm a pharmacist, that's what I do. But there are so much more like detailed, in-depth, focused resources out there for ADHD. So I wanted to include those in the book. Further reading if you like. Obviously, you don't have to, but I just think that they're really, really cool resources out there. And a lot of them are from the perspective of someone with ADHD. So I don't have ADHD. I know what it's like to see it in a close loved one. I know what it's like to see it in friends and family. But it's not the same as dealing with it from the inside. Sometimes hearing it in the words of someone who is dealing with ADHD, that can be really, really helpful. So hopefully you'll get some value out of those resources. And as I said earlier, I did already put that up in the app. So let me see here. Okay, doesn't look like we have anything in the chat. So I am going to go ahead and hop on out of here. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. And I hope that you have a wonderful day, a wonderful rest of your weekend. I guess this is the very tail end of it, but enjoy what is left. And I will see everyone soon. Take care.